think the worst life lived in the 20th century were that of the Santa Commando. The Santa Commando, a word that you should be familiar with if you've studied your modern history, but if you're not, I'll just give you what the Wikipedia, I'll give you the little blurb. Santa Commandos were work units made up of German Nazi death camp prisoners. They were composed of prisoners, usually Jews, who were forced on threat of their own death to aid with the disposal of gas chamber victims during the Holocaust. The death camp Sonderkommandos, who were always inmates, were unrelated to the SS Sonderkommandos, which were ad hoc units formed from members of various SS officers between 1938 and 1945. The German term was part of the vague and euphemistic language which the Nazis used to refer to aspects of the final solution, e.g. Einsatzkommando deployment units, death factory workers. And right, to some degree, it's like you'd choose death before that. And these guys did it. So in some ways, they're a sellout and they fucking know it. But they're enslaved on pain of death. Quite a few of these guys revolted and died. Actually rebelled, fought. And they were like, stay alive. Why? So someone bears witness to this. It's like, no matter how bad this gets, no matter how far this goes, no matter what shit they ask us to do, stay alive. To live. To tell people what happened to you. Now, it's like former Sonder Commandos. They were absolutely instrumental in bringing loads of real murderous, sadistic bastards to justice. It's like, oh, they had the goods on the whole thing. It's like these guys, these slaves, when they eventually survived, escaped, one way or another, they had the goods on a lot of them. Most of what's known about what went on comes from those guys who, we have to stay alive. And when they got towards the end of the war, it's like, you know, the war, Germany were losing it on all fronts, and what they did was they like accelerated their extermination programs. They were losing on the battlefield, they were pouring more and more and more resources into killing people in the murder factories. It was an industry. Incredible. It's like the Nazis were like liars, like incredible liars, but they thought their lies were clever. They thought they were real smart with their lies. They thought, well, it's cleverness, isn't it? It's not, if they believe you, it's their problem. And it's like, you get on the train, you're on your way to Auschwitz. And the last thing that staff at Auschwitz want is a fuss or a fight. They ain't interested in that. So they have to keep the facade going and then pull the rug right at the last minute when, no, you're not getting a shower, you're getting gassed to death. And you'll hear people talk about them gas chambers and they'll say, well, it was like a humane way of killing people. It's like, what? It's like you've got like an industrial byproduct, fucking gas, that was made for killing, you know, a cheap way of killing rodents. And it's like, well, it attacks the nervous system, so it'd work just as well on humans. Might take half an hour to kill them. Might take half an hour to kill them, but, you know, It's their half hour. Makes no difference to us. So it's like, you've then got like an army of workers charged with, right, okay, you go in there and you clean up that mess. When they were on the way in, we had you dressed up nice and smart, pretending to be workers, like in a Potemkin village train station. And now that bit's done, you get to see the people that you just tricked into handing over all their belongings in an orderly fashion, getting undressed and then walking into an execution chamber. You tricked them into doing that. You pulled the rug. You plan based on just deception and getting those who you mean to kill to cooperate in their own death because they wouldn't believe it to be true that that's what you intend to do to them. And they think that's fucking clever. Oh, you know, efficiency, German efficiency at its best. It's like, has there ever been motherfuckers like that? And it's like, they weren't the leaders of the Nazi party. It's like, no, they were the people who worked for the government who did that. They were people doing those jobs of enjoying torturing these people, enjoying killing them. You could apply for that job. These are members of the general public who went working and collaborated, joined the SS to join this. There were people who were out of work and applied for a job. You had it, by the end of the war, the people who'd worked in the death camp industry or the concentration camp business for 10 years become experts. Oh, we're the world leader in it. Take pride in what they do. But I'm going in a real roundabout way to make a real, a solid point here, right? And about something different. Right. The Santa Commandos. Those guys given the worst job anyone's ever envisaged, anyone's ever thought of, and that'd be their lot in life. We stay alive so we get to live to tell the tale. The world must find out what happens here. Legal or not, no one in the world stand for this. You know, their suicide rate was high in that unit. High. But it wasn't anywhere nearly as high as the suicide rate of post-op transsexuals. You believe that? So the suicide rate of 30%, that's really outrageous. 30% suicide rate. But it's lower than the suicide rate of post-op transgenders. Lower than that. Picked up on that in a soundbite. It was something that was discussed briefly on an old Joe Rogan experience, that the Santa Commando had a lower suicide rate than the trans. Tell you that the hallmark, right, of like that evil that makes it possible for it to go get as far as that, the concentration, the extermination camp, the evil that lets it get as far as that, the lying, that tricking people and thinking that's what makes you clever. Tricking people, deliberately set about tricking people, and then when you get away with pulling the wool over someone's eyes, you celebrate it because you've tricked them, you've won. And it'd be, to some, all that getting the Jews, naive, stupid fools. Ha! We just walked them straight into there. We could have told them there was tea and cake and they'd have just walked in there and gassed them. Aren't they stupid? It's like, I see that attitude in the world. That practice. That act. So we told them. Yeah, it got out in like March 2020 that COVID had escaped from a scientific, medical research lab, military, high grade in Wuhan, China. And they brought someone credible on who said, yeah, well, this can't not be a man-made virus. It's got too many mutations. Massive whistleblower turned up in America 3 years ago. Turned out was telling the truth. What happened? In lockstep, the entire establishment moved to say disinformation, lies. And they had nothing to counter it. They were saying, look, this is racism. This is xenophobia and sinophobia. We have to stop calling COVID the Wuhan coronavirus and the Chinese virus because it's fueling violence against immigrants. Is what they said. So we have all the hallmarks now. Those people in the right places who take joy in having pulled the wool and played a trick and prove themselves in their mind to be clever. Not wise, not intelligent, clever. That grinning deep delight of having gotten away with it. Over and over and over again. I think they're into it. I think that the COVID, the little authoritarians, large and small, they enjoyed the COVID. They liked it. And they took full advantage of it. They also proved that they have got the tools to tell the right lie to enough people so enough of them cause a panic and then turn on those who are skeptical and say, why aren't you panicking? Are you not human? Why aren't you afraid? Is there something wrong with you? You're not frightened for your life from a cold virus. Therefore, there's something wrong with you. It's like we got a couple of years of that absurdity. In our faces are now the same people who treated us like that have now got no excuse for it. They say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And then would appeal to fake Christian virtue as to say, well, I've apologised, therefore you should forgive me. Okay. Unfortunately, it's like when you've fucked with people good and proper, they don't get to decide to forgive you. Higher forces decide who's forgiven and who isn't forgiven. One cannot make a conscious decision to say, I accept your apology to the guy who's just put a fucking bullet in you. Just stabbed you in the back. I've stabbed you in the back, fucked you, good style, betrayed you. But I'm sorry. You must forgive me or you're not a Christian. Now that's a game if you can play it. That is a game. See that one the other day, the man, he looked like me with a white powdered face and a wig on and a decent shave, this guy. The crossover. Transgender pastor who's calling those who oppose him and his agenda ungodly, un-Jesus-like. And then the old fool who's like some guy he's letting him fuck him or something. It's antichrist to speak out against the trans. It's antichrist, he used that word, antichrist, to speak against the trans. And then accused what you would call mainline Christians of sacrificing children. I'm like, wow, that's on the nose. Those who oppose you are the Antichrist and guilty of sacrificing children, you say. Like, I suppose you're all about abortion rights. Dead right you are. Suppose you're all about gender affirming care and mutilating kids. Damn right you are. Yet you accuse those who would want to stop you doing this of sacrificing children and being the Antichrist. It's like when the trans attempt to take the spiritual turf, which they're in the attempt of doing, they're trying to do, it's like this thing that's happened recently with this ridiculous, heinous killing. That might derail it. It might actually derail it. That might actually be your divine intervention. I put it to the world that you don't understand God well enough, and there are those that do, right? And it's like, if you look for a miracle, right, not understanding God's nature, you look for a miracle to end the madness and his nature not being ours. Drive the hand of that person to do that murdering. Drive the hand of that person to do that murdering. Like God would? Yeah. It's like we don't understand. It's like it's a primal force. It's like it's for us to temper God. So you will not like God. It's like God's too real for most people. It's like you have to have a sense of humour. It's like killing is not off the table. There are those who've got small minds, right? Small minds who might think, right? Okay, so there's been a trans school shooter. Nasty piece of work. A terrible piece of business. But that person themselves have, in their mind, every reason in the world to do that. And I bet you something that there's a manifesto in the world that they're not letting us see that will make that person make the case that it was the Almighty God that drove them to do it. Bet you anything that one leaves behind a trans supremacist manifesto. Speaking of, you mean to kill us all because you're afraid of us because we are the next step in human evolution? we are better than you and you fear us. That kind of shit. And it won't be about I. It'll be as done as a we. We. They, them. Her and him, whatever she is. You notice how it was such a shock to the establishment that they revoked the person's trans pass immediately and referred to them as she who'd done this murder. Trans pass revoked. So then you get this cognitive dissonance amongst the trans community who are bigoted fucking haters. So they're like, well, they're only Christian kids, fuck them. It's like hearing about a couple of stormtroopers getting fucking squished off the foot of an attack walker. It's like, oh, we should have seen it. You know, to them they'd be thinking like, well, it's like that last scene in The Inglourious Bastards where all them Nazis burned to death in that theatre. That's what they'd be like. Haha, you went into it, you don't think. You don't give a fuck. It's like, you get people like that, they're in a lot of grief, they're in a lot of pain, and when they're in a lot of pain like that, right, suffer. Nobody else's suffering matters. It's like everyone else can fucking die because you suffer more than they do. Why should their pain mean anything to you when you're in so much pain? Fuck 'em is the cry. And it's not unique to that group of people. It's just a thing human beings, that's what we're like, right? You go mad at that homeless person who hasn't got a fucking penny. Or that guy who's like, on the last minute to work, with 30 pence in his pocket, in poverty, working full time. And you go to that guy and you say, you couldn't spare a few pounds, could you, for, I don't know, Christian aid to help the poor black children in Africa? No, fuck them. Fuck them. So really, there's an urgency here. I've got enough money in my pocket to get a cup of coffee when I get up to work, and that's all. I haven't got penny one to give. Although, you know, prayers and good thoughts, they're really cheap. I ain't got a penny to give you. Fuck them. It's like, you have to be doing real well in life if you can be well sorted or organised enough so you can then attempt to save the world and look after to look after the welfare of others. It means you've already sorted yourself out. You shouldn't be saying about, oh, let's make the world a better place until you've made the world a better place for yourself. It's like there's too many people in this political game, isn't there, who just haven't got a fucking clue. So I can say that. It's like, why? So, well, I'm not in the political game. I'm not someone who makes YouTube videos, does a bit of counselling. I'm not in it. I'm not well organised enough to get into it. I'm like, hey, you know what, you guys who are political thinkers and commentators and influencers and actual politicians, it's like, I'm smarter than you and I haven't worked it out. I'm smarter than you and I don't know how to play. I'm smarter than you and everything's always been a challenge. So I can't join you on this this field because I haven't fixed it. I ain't sorted it out yet. I haven't sorted it out. Like, I know I'm not worthy. It's like, you don't. You don't know you're not worthy or qualified to do the job you're doing. You don't know that. I tell you, if you're not stable and the foundations aren't deep, your attempts to save the world are going to be half-arsed and ineffectual, and you're going to waste people's fucking time. Either do it or don't. There's a fucking super problem that's not being... See, it's like... That sex and death cult. Now, I've been tracking a sex and death cult on the move 2 decades. And I keep seeing it branch out and get bigger. And then it sidesteps its way into feminism, supercharges it, picks up all the weapons that have been left lying around, sets about manipulating. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm from this side of the internet. It's like, what side's that? And it's like, well, I've changed the language over to like psychology, but I actually I do psychic problems, treat it like it's a mystical issue. Like what? Oh yeah, it's more appropriate language for most people who are superstitious. They know what you're talking about if you talk about it in terms of superstition. So I'm like, I found a crossover here between superstition and psychology. And I found a causal link between superstition, hypervigilance, guilt, as to where I've come up with a causal link. It's like, I know what you're up against here. You're up against a sex and death cult. And it's like client side. It's not that you've got a unifying ideology. It's that you've got a guiding light. From like the wetware is programmed. It's client side. It's like the modifications to the human to make one receptive to these ideologies so they throw their lives away, jump in the first pitfall. It's like, no, it's like that's been manually programmed in. What? It's like, yeah, I'm sorry to say, but it's like we've been made to order. We've been built to order. It's like we didn't realise it before we were young enough. Well, before we were old enough to even know how to tie our shoelaces, it had already been decided that we were going to be what the social designers of the 1970s and 80s thought we should be. And we've been like systematically dehumanized, dumbed down. And how have they done that? And it's got something to do with the 1960s. It's got something to do with an alliance between the politicians and the entertainment industry. What, John? So yeah, 1960s. It's like the sexual revolution happened in the imaginations of children, not in the real world. There's a thing going on in the media class as to where they shine the light on those who are said to be fucking everyone, where in the real world that would be a source of shame. In that inverse world, it's a source of attention and glamour. The sex symbol, all the eyes in the world. What's all that about? It's like we haven't caught up with the invention of the camera. Before there was cameras, you know, you'd be able to talk your way out of just about any problem you might come across if you were a good enough liar. If you knew people well enough, you'd be able to talk yourself out of anything. You know, no ballistics evidence, no blood tests, no mugshots, no. There might have been nearer fingerprints then. There might have been, there's just that. But all these things we take for granted, they did not have, so it was all about witness testimony. So the whole world was then based on lived experience, because that's all that was available. So evidence would come in the tune of anecdote, story, and that be law. Not perfect. Because you're not perfect, because you're living in a world there, as I say, you could say anything. People have been known in history to tell any lie that better suit them. I mean, what kind of creature is it? And there be many that can, like, impersonate someone, walk into a fucking bank and take out a mortgage. Now, there are those who do it and have done it, and I'm like, they're dangerous fucking people. They're really dangerous people, but you only hear about them in, like, the back pages or the middle sections of the local newspapers, where you'll say, this guy's gone down for 4 years for identity theft and fraud, and it'd be, that's not a new crime. It's like identity theft and fraud's been a crime since there's been anything written down anywhere about anyone. Like, not a new thing to be doing. All one needs is the will to do so, with a mind to advance themselves, to take advantage and take other people's property. And that willingness to take other people's property, or the willingness to steal from strangers, or even your own, but strangers be another side of it. It's like stealing from your own family, right? That's a lack of understanding in your family of property. That's inevitable if you've got kids. You will have pilfering if you're in poverty, because you've never had enough property, or if you've been wearing things like hand-me-downs, you've been sharing things as a kid. They'll say, learn to share. No, bad lesson. It's learn to look after your stuff. The right lesson. Learn the value of your stuff. If you like your stuff, look after it. Bicycles, like cars, the child's first bike should be a load of shit. Why? Because they're probably going to leave it somewhere and it get pinched. Kids, back my day, you learned about property by owning a bike. Kids who have bikes stolen, that'd be a trauma. My bike's been stolen from outside the shop. But we lived in a different world then, as to where if you could, because of the nature of a bike and the nature of the people who steal bikes. When a bike was stolen, you'd have an eyewitness to say, headed in that direction. People were familiar enough with each other to say, isn't that so-and-so's bike he's riding? But that willingness to steal comes from that. You've not learned about property. It's like you've been stolen from. You're a victim. You've had something taken from you, and therefore it's okay for you to take from others. Or that you've been shown it through experience. You had something taken from it. So again, question of values. When I was a kid, they were like, teach everyone to share. And it's like, what the fuck? Share? It's like, no, our instinct is to own and to look after our stuff, to build. And that notion of teach the kids to share. some commie bullshit from the 1970s, isn't it? Some hippie shit. Goes against nature. It's like, do your best to work together. Don't teach the kids to share. There's a time and place for it. It's like, I think my generation could go down as ending up being 48 years old, so am I, late Gen X. We could said to have ended up being the worst parents in history. Why? Probably because we've got the broadest horizons, and we're the most quote unquote open-minded. Also the biggest sinners and hypocrites. You don't know how many times I've heard a parent, usually a mother, will say of a daughter. I've been hearing this for years. You have a mother, and a daughter will be having sex with a lad who's 17, and when she's like 13. Oh, well, I used to be having sex with an older guy when I was 13 too. It never did me any harm. And I wouldn't want to be seen as a hypocrite by telling her she shouldn't. I've heard that, and it'd be put forward as ironclad wisdom. It's like not enough self-awareness to say, you know, kid, you sat in a council house. You're a single middle-aged woman sat in a council house with a part-time job, and you've got all these kids all over the place, and you say you love them all the time, but you don't give a fuck about them, really. You don't give a fuck about the future or the safety, as long as they don't do anything you didn't. And then become a person who's really incredibly easy for them to then fool. You can just tell them anything, parents who are like that. You can just tell them anything, they'll believe any lie about you. Good or bad. Parents who try and protect their children always inevitably fail, right? But that doesn't mean that the endeavour isn't really important. If you just let it swing and you just enable, giving children agency that you really have never recognised that you yourself have had. Seems to think that young people will naturally raise themselves. So you step away and you let the internet and the television raise them, and the idiots they go to school with. You don't know. You know, the children of drug dealers and thieves, they go to school too. They see all sorts in their house. And we tell all the other little kids about it. The other little kids are like, do you know how old I was when I first saw drugs at school? Drugs. 11. When I was 11, I witnessed a lad of 13 sell another lad of 13 an LSD tab. And he was keeping these LSD tabs in his pen. You unscrew his pen, pull one out. Couple of quid. Not giving them away. Selling them. So where do you see this, John? In detention at Sir Wilfrid School, Rochdale. Took me years later to work out what it was on that little piece of paper, but then I eventually worked out what it was. I had an idea that it were drugs because the money had changed hands and There's nothing so small could be so... I knew it was shifty at the time, but it took me a couple of years to work out that's what the transaction was. I mean, kids... I didn't come across kids on acid at school again until I was 14. When I was 14, I saw kids on drugs at school. Yeah, plenty of that. Old generation of teachers pretend to see nothing. Again, they'll find a reason to slam down hard on something that would be, that they could, throw the political blanket over, like someone said something mean and racist. Whereas, like, a funny old thing, whereas that shifted quickly, because they shifted from teachers, shifted from being racist, right, to abhorring it. And it happened almost overnight while I was going through school. Because I remember school where the teachers singled out the black kid for punishment, belittled him, would speak of banana boats and the like. And then suddenly it went to, will never not ever be tolerated. I was like, well, hang on a minute. You were teaching us something. You people were teaching us something different, and it changed midstream. And that's a problem that I've got, and a problem I've always carried. It's like, I was taught a certain set of imperfect values as a child, but I had the benefit of being raised a Christian at the same time. So it's a hypocrisy. So you've got the criminal rules, the reality of the world, and then you've got the ideal being the Christian values, and knowing you're in the wrong. And it's like the Christian values give the evil criminal, when the evil criminal takes things too far, doesn't realise he's an evil criminal until he comes unstuck as one. That part that knew better gives you the chance to come back. Gives you the chance to resolve the two halves that are in conflict. But if that set of values have never existed, what do you do then? Where's your safety net? Where's the means you've got to save yourself? Because there's no one else coming to save anyone. Not from themselves. Without that safety net of knowing better, what chance is there of self-redemption? What fills that void? What fills that black hole? We live in a superstitious world because of it, because that we could agree, whether we're spiritual or not, that's a dirty great hole. Not knowing the difference between right and wrong. For many generations, because of the way we've been educated, it's been assumed that people actually know the difference between right and wrong. I mean, to some degree, animals do. They know when they've been abused. They know when they've been mistreated. It's like, maybe we the human, it's like, we know we've been mistreated. But it happened to us when we were so young that we can't say why, and we don't know the how of it, and there's no motivation. But we can look around now and say, The people who raised me were not rocket scientists. They were not child psychologists. They were not biologists. They were not engineers. They were not geniuses. I think the creature doubles down until it's dead because it hasn't got a way home. It doubles down until it dies. When the whole world's detached from it. And it's detached from the whole world. There's an important thing, I take for granted, right? Described as a bridge to the world, right? A bridge to the world. I have a perpetual bridge to the world. Why? I don't mind talking to people and I don't have any trouble communicating with anyone. That's a bridge to the world. There are those who don't have that. There are those who don't have the language to be able to describe the trap they find themselves in, having been crossed the Rubicon, past the point of no return. They're just confused and terrified. People who are confused and terrified, you can sell them any story and they'll believe it. As I have been around on the internet for a very long time, since I got a dial-up connection, and I must have written pages and pages of crap back in the old written word days of the internet. And once upon a time, me, myself, be in that age an operative of, let's say, forces of chaos in the early internet world. Who attempted then to do what these people are doing now. And what be that? Let's spread some dangerous myths and conspiracy theories. Let's target those who make the most fuss about it. Tell stories about those who are easy to frighten being in danger. It's like, I came up with such a good idea one day and just put it around the old mystical and what's really happening sort of forums. And it was just really the story. It was, right, it's funny, right? Movie, Magnum Force. What's that about, John? It's a Dirty Harry movie about what would be described now as a death squad who decided that the justice system didn't work anymore and they were going to take out the trash, and they were all cops. They were traffic cops. So they were able to just pull people up at the side of the road that they were after, find a reason to pull them over, and then just flat out murder them to death in the car. Murderers. A death squad of cops. And it was written by John Milius, right? John Milius likes doing this, right, to the left. And he's always liked doing that to the left. That's what he does. He likes to fuck with them. So it's like, you check out his work, it's like, what did he write? It's like, loads of the dialogue of Jaws. He wrote Dirty Harry, Magnum Force. He wrote Apocalypse Now. Directed and wrote Conan the Barbarian with Oliver Stone. He made Red Dawn. It's like Red Dawn's a propaganda movie to let it be known to anyone who might think that it's a feasible plan of action to in a way, mount a limited nuclear attack and then ground invasion of the United States, that there will be a rifleman behind every blade of fucking grass. An intentional fuck you, commies. Don't even think about it. Like, war movie. Ha! Like, fuck you, Russians, no. And it's like, what was that based on? It's like, well, theoretically, if the US was going to fall, that's how it would happen. You know, you'd mount simultaneous attacks on both coastlines and then invade from the south. And Red Dawn does it good. They go full steam, don't they, by like dropping in a load of paratroopers to basically, if you drop in a load of paratroopers into a town, it's like, oh, you can just, you don't have to send them in with a lot of gear, because if you send a load of paratroopers into a country town like in Red Dawn, they go and take over the local gun supply shop, so they've got more ammunition and weapons. They then go and take over a supermarket and a cafe and a pub, and it's like, well, we don't have to worry about the fact that we just jumped in without any rations, because this food that they've got here is perfectly good for us to eat. It's like, you surprise attack the US and you can surprise attack it with paratroopers. It's like, they can live off the land if you drop them on the fucking roof of a Walmart. The people watching Dawn of the Dead, and and it's sort of the fantasy absurdity of that these guys are like at the end of the world, banged up in a mall. It's got pretty much everything. You might have to do without things like fresh milk and the like, but you know, you can make a few. You can make a few sacrifices, can't you? There'll only be so much cheese, you know. But it's like, they're doing all right. It's like, there's another side to this. It's like the zombie movie is always a carrier wave for an apocalypse movie, or a humans left to their own devices without government, right? They're always a carrier for that, and it's like, yeah, great target. If the world goes to hot war, right, what might be a better plan of action? Total surprise attack to hold down things like, again, food supply. Or something really messy. It's like, I think about things like war quite sophisticated, you know, in a very sophisticated way, because it's the old. There's no appetite. It's hard to raise that fervour that they once did. They can get people on Twitter to change their bios to have a little Ukrainian flag, but they can't get them to send their kids to fucking war when your battlefield outcome. Well, I'm not interested myself, you know, it's like your battlefield outcome's likely you're going to get blown to bits with a high explosive shell, and that'd be the way you go. And it'd be like, to get like it's blasted, right? To go through that and like survive it, it's like you'd be in probably more pain than. That would be like the most horrifying, terrible thing to happen to you, like arms and legs blown off and stuff like that. Like, and then, you know, you're going to die anyway, but it's going to take you a few days to die. And the way that the world is, they're going to try and save you. It's just lose, 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 lose. create a couple of £1 million of a medical bill and ongoing ongoing treatment and likely what they call palliative care. It's like he's dying, but it's just a matter of when. He's in a coma. It's like, sign up for that? It's like, nah, no one signs up for that. So it's like this raising of armies. It's like there are those nations with armies, right, and those without, with none. Fuck all, no will to. Whereas, you know, in China, right, if they want to recruit a lot of people into the military, right, they could just, on the anniversary every year of like the rape of Nanking, they could just put out a documentary film about what the Japanese did. Or on a date marking the end of the Second Opium War, they can put on a historical documentary about just what cunts the British were, or the combination of British industry and military government working hand in hand to do a deal where your country wasn't even, it was just caught up in the middle of it, really. They knew you had no teeth, so they abused you. They knew you had a country that was big on coastline and short on ships, and they let it be known that those naval guns meant for blowing ships to pieces can do a fucking good job of anything, really. Oh yeah, they can be pointed at the town and fire them all day. That's the British idea of resolving a dispute. Let's turn up with a battleship. Fucking let rip. We surrender. Okay, you've surrendered. Don't do it again. Sign this piece of paper. Now you've got a promise to disarm. Or we're going to come back and we're going to blast you again with our big guns. Doesn't take much for these people out in the wider world to find someone like myself who's, a bit of brevity, talk to. Just people. And yeah, haven't we been fucked for? Wouldn't it all be a big titter and a giggle if like we, the Chinese, we've been fucked for and we live a rough life, and you know what? If we take Mao off the table and we forget about Mao and we say, well, that was just a repercussion of the shit that had been done to us. That's how fucked we were. That's the mess we were left in. And he, in his way, cleaned up the mess. You can say that. Take Mao out and just leave the foreign powers in, and you've got 200 years of betrayal and piss take and atrocity, which they can draw upon. Much in the same way as the Russians will always draw upon, having learned the right and the wrong lessons of World War II, because they paid the price in lives and saw it. Man, woman and child saw it. So the Russians can sit there and say, look, we've seen this war shit. So there's questions can be asked. Did Russia ever recover from World War II? And it's like, meh. It's like they could be people so embittered. The hardiest bastards alive, the Chinese, because those who are alive all suffered under some fucking terrible conditions. But they're alive. Same with the Russians. It's like the Americans, the British, Australians, Canadians. It's like we've been living in clover for a couple 100 years because we ain't been invaded, smashed up. I mean, World War II, the Blitz, it's like, that ain't shit. I'm sorry, compared to what others have faced. It's like, your cities didn't get shelled, did they? Didn't get shelled. A few good strikes with bombs dropped from the air at random. Manageable. It's like having them bastards 30 miles away bombarding you with big guns. Bit different, isn't it? Surrounded and cut off. Besieged. It's like they know something of that in Europe, don't they? They know something of what it is to be under siege. And it'd be this island nation. We've suffered rationing, and we've had our naval, our trade disrupted because we are absolute. Britain is completely reliant on trade. You know, the world does well at peace. Britain does well at peace. I was trying to say this before all this shit came down, before the election got stolen, and before the COVID came along. Post-Brexit Britain, I was saying, hey, this looks okay for us here. It's like Middle East with the America's aggressive, bull-headed, fucking narcissistic, sadistic set. Having to want to fucking control you. We got a sensible person talking about it in Trump. Wasn't being aggressive, was looking at this rationally and saying, you know what, we can all make a lot of money here. And all there be is cheap energy and growth. We can deal with this. We can do a business deal. I was seeing it. I was like, this could be big, this. It's like, you let the world know that the psychos have gone and there's no... Remember anti-Americanism? When that was, you're anti-American. Remember that? Like from a different world. The old anti-Americanism has now returned. And the world's belligerent towards America now. Trump's gone belligerent because they've now got Biden. It was supposed to be, the real guy in the room. The world's now belligerent because it's like our so-called experts. They haven't changed seats in 20 years. They're all still entrenched and they still think the world is what they say it is. They dismissed the anti-Americanism as the old Obama attitude of, what are you going to do about it? Live with it. Well, it's like that. The old anti-Americanism was quickly defeated by Trump because it's like around the world, someone like myself, British, understanding something of how America does business on the world stage. But like, oh my God, someone who isn't going to start wars, someone who isn't going to just outwardly fucking bullshit our way into all kinds of trouble. No real scandals with this fellow will be all right. Trump, it's like he's actually, as crazy as he is, right? He's 10 times better than anyone they've got politically. For giving the people a fair chance. And it not being this perpetual door slam in the face society. It's like Trump is many bad things, but I tell you what, he wasn't that guy who was interested in long-term strategic influence and trying to mind read, trying to play God and do magic and make trouble and destabilise and shift and connive and always be making friends with dissidents in every country in the world. Oh, they're assets, they're tools. All returned, all come flooding back, rushing back the second Biden got back in. So I remember the day after I'm being questioned about it. I'm like, oh, what's so bad about it? I'm like, Jake Sullivan. What? Never heard of him. You'll hear of him. Fucking clueless, condescending prick. Like a fucking bad primary school teacher. Jen Psaki, another primary school teacher. These people are going to be in the back, front and centre, and they know nothing and say nothing. And get really snotty when people shut down. It's like these people are coming back. Anthony Blinken. Like, never heard of him? It's like, oh, just you wait. So these people have been away for 4 years, but it's like they're Obama's people. It's like they were well entrenched idiots who've been with him from the very start. Those who came on the Obama wave, all the meaningful activists in the Obama campaign, all found their way into government jobs. People don't get it when I say there's been a crossover where a lot of people who were once upon a time tricksters and fucking chancers all suddenly were removed from the world of crime and fantasy and fucking woo magic and voodoo into politics when they hitched themselves to the Obama train and walked the Obama walk. It's like that's when something really bad's happened. It's like the thing that you fear the most, right? The left will be a tyrant, a demagogue, right? Everything you fear might happen. Already happened when Obama got in 2008. You just don't realise it. And you never did. And if you're not switched on yet, it's like you're a long way from weighing up what the fuck's wrong. It's like the false messiah was elected in 2008. All of you things you're facing now, it's like previously were all part of the left, the old left. And all of the old left's movements that were in the way used to be made up of rational people, old school gay rights activists. If they've not joined the new woke for the clicks, you'll find the really level-headed people who know a thing or two. It's like they're the people who have, a lot of them, have drawn wisdom from their suffering. But every single one of those interest groups at the same time as Obama came along, there was an Obama operative who then subverted them all. Subverted them all. What was that? That song that people were saying had a cult. It had a cult meaning at the time it was around that, My Umbrella. It's like, yeah, you're all coming into the same unified movement now. And it's the black and new now anti-racist movement. Feminism, although feminism was a Trojan horse, an old Trojan horse that was in its way, stood in the way of what they really wanted, but the feminists did 90% of the damage in order to create the wetware and facilitate the conditions where they could breed a generation of like serial killer sex maniacs who think themselves infallible. It's like the great tragedy or our great defeat happened in 2008. And it was a walkover, unopposed, practically. Who was allowed to be hard anti-Obama? Practically no one. All because nobody knew anything about him. Nobody had anything on him. But then those that did have things on him had things on him that was so alarming that they couldn't be said. Obama's supposedly a lawyer and a political activist, teacher, and none of his writings are anywhere to be found. It's like the great danger is, it's already done. It's like you're turning up 15 years late to a pie, some people, and thinking they're discovering things when you've turned up 15 years late. You don't recognise that Obama was able to subvert the New Age community in 2008 and incorporate it. And it was their techniques, networks, that at that stage infiltrated his movement and did whatever they wanted in his wake. You know, like, Lindsay work out that it's a Gnostic cult, and I'm like, right, who's got power in this cult? Who are the cult leaders? Who's the high priest? Who are the high priestesses? Name them. If you won't, I will. When I've worked with Oprah, really, go and have a word with Oprah. Head to Hollywood and have a word. Go and find Michelle Obama and have a word with her. And work out that she's an evil, malignant bitch. Brainless. And a pervert. Go and find that out. If you want to challenge the Church of Woke, you have to take down its high priests. You know who they are now. I've been telling you that it was a sex and death cult that was embedded, and the only people who fell into it were at a predisposition. The predisposition is personality disorder. Good one. I, unfortunately, was one of the fools who propagated that be a thing, and that people with personality disorders be the long sought wetware that the mystics spoke of, by way of being people who can be bent to your will and reprogrammed to your purpose. But it's like, all the pimps in the world knew that anyway. So Andrew Tate knew that. You know, all the pimps know that. All the criminals know that. Anyone who's used people as jail cover knows that. All criminals know that. So it's like, I hardly let the cat out of the bag, but it's like dangerous fucking knowledge. So it's a matter of hand in hand with a sort of socialist, social justice cult. You've also had a sex and death cult, which has been able to lure people into situations and have them broaden the horizons and pass points of no return. And they have to live with that. And this is the world that creates. We live in a world of heartbreak and unintended consequences. And out of control, highly emotionally charged, even spiritual, religious fervour, fanaticism. You say God, right? Let's talk about this, right? When I say God, it's like God's hand will have driven that killer. Well, like, remember back in the days when we used to talk about Islamic suicide bombers, suicide attackers, and they'd be saying, you know, praise be Allah. I'm talking about the same thing. Try telling that guy who's willing to blow himself to pieces that, hey man, your God's probably the wrong God. What's he going to tell you? I'd say we're in a bad spot, but at the same time, you're up against an enemy that will double down until it's got nowhere to go. But they're not beyond taking the whole world with them. That's what I'm trying to say. The suffering of the world is nothing compared to the suffering they feel. It's like a black hole. Nothing in this world can fill that black hole. No miracle cure of science or everybody saying, okay, we promise to call you a woman from now on and she and say that you look pretty. We promise to do it. Not even that's going to be enough. And I know that. You can give the forces of darkness everything they ask for and it will not be enough. I read about that. Some American celebrity woman who's had a Baphomet tattoo removed. Baphomet. When you look at Baphomet, you should use your fucking eyes. A goat's head. Now, do you know anything about goats? Well, goats have insatiable appetites, but fundamentally will eat anything. And they're stubborn and foolish and will eat themselves to death. They'll devour themselves into the ground. Baphomet, the spirit of the insatiable. They'll eat anything. Known a few people like that.